Welcome to another episode of On the History Trail. I'm your host and tour guide, Mark Nonestide. On today's episode, we're going to talk about one of the worst train accidents in American history. On February 6, 1951, the Broker, a commuter train packed with passengers, crashed at this location in Woodbridge. We're going to talk to Florence Rodzinski, who was a passenger on board that train, and also speak with Frank LaPenta, a resident of Woodbridge who was one of the first people to arrive at the crash scene. So sit back and relax and follow me as we travel on the History Trail.
So when we got there, we parked across the street from where the train accident was. We got out of the car and we looked up. Well, what we saw was a train laying on its side. Cars were bent and twisted. There were cars on the trestle that were kinked and hanging over the trestle. The coal car had rolled down the embankment, spilling its contents on the embankment, was lying in the road, and the train engine was laying off on its side up top the trestle. First car derailed, second car derailed, third car derailed, fourth car derailed.
I didn't hear anything. It was so quiet. It was quiet in the car. It was quiet outside. It was almost a haunting quietness. All you could hear was the hiss of the steam leaving the locomotive.
Well, we're standing at the area where the Broker crashed in 1951, and the area looked much different at that time. The New Jersey Turnpike was under construction, and the Turnpike is actually about 100 feet in front of me, or several hundred feet in front of me. And at the time, the Pennsylvania Railroad was building a bridge over the Turnpike. They had to divert train traffic around the construction of the bridge, so they built a temporary train trestle right at this location. And the trains were diverted from the main line here and came crossing over where this roadway is, and then were diverted around where the bridge was being constructed over the Turnpike. Trains were supposed to slow to about 25 miles an hour to go over this temporary trestle, but it's estimated that the Broker hit this temporary trestle at between 50 and 60 miles an hour. The steam engine jumped the train tracks and fell down a large embankment onto Fulton Street, taking with it several passenger cars filled with passengers. And at this location, two train cars became wedged and suspended above Legion Street, and several passenger cars were behind it. I have with me Florence Rodzinski. She is a survivor of what was one of the worst train accidents in modern American history. Florence, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Florence, tell me a little bit about your time before the accident. You were taking this train to your job?
For about 2 years out of college. I was working at McGraw-Hill. They were then at 42nd Street, and so it was easy to take a subway, get to Penn Station, pick up a shuttle, and board the Broker at Newark, because that was an express, and it got to South Amboy quickly. I've been doing that for about 2 years. Always rode the back end of the cars because it was crowded. The Broker was always crowded, but that particular day it was very crowded, standing room only, and most people went to the front of the train. And they were standing there, but I never liked riding that close to a locomotive.
So at the time you were living in South Amboy?
No, I was living in Sayreville.
In Sayreville?
I would take a bus from Madura's drugstore,
okay.
number 2 bus home.
And so you'd take the bus down to the South Amboy train station,
right,
and pick up the Broker?
No, in the morning I would take the shuttle in, which went straight into Penn Station.
Okay.
But coming home at night, I took the Broker.
Okay, so you have this job in New York City. You're fresh out of college,
right?
And commuting on this train. So you're very familiar with this line, then?
Yeah. And it was a good line, but he was speeding.
He was. Yeah.
Once he hit Woodbridge, it felt like 70 miles an hour, and then he would slow down when he approached Perth Amboy, but then he would speed across the bridge, the Raton River Bridge, at South End, where that was scary.
So let's talk about that day. You worked all day at McGraw Hill,
Right.
And then you left work, and then from there, where did you pick up the train immediately, or?
I took a subway to Penn Station and picked up what I call a shuttle. It was an electrified train, which took me into Newark. On the same platform, I then waited for the broker to come in and boarded the broker.
Okay, and it got its name, the broker. Was this because of all the businessmen?
Yeah, from Wall Street.
Okay.
You know, and they had a private bar in the back. The last car was always a private car. They played cards and had cocktails and things of that sort.
So this was a commuter train.
It was, yeah.
Okay, okay. And it was a steam engine, pulled by a steam engine.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you remember what car you sat in that day?
The sixth car.
It was the sixth car.
Sixth car. And toward the rear, about the third seat from the end. Seats were at a premium that day. Everybody was rushing to get in. But fortunately, I got a window seat, and most people went forward.
Okay. Now, did you know the people who sat around you? I mean, you took this train every day.
There were seating companions. You know, you got to know people. You didn't know their names, but they were about the same people all the time riding in the same car.
So you got to be familiar with both.
Yeah,
How about the conductors? I mean, the conductors on the train as well.
Yeah.
Great.
It got to be kind of a family thing.
So the train leaves and it's traveling on what's now today the New Jersey coastline.
Right.
That route, and you mentioned you would have gotten off at South Amboy, but before that there was the stop near Woodbridge.
There was no stop.
No stop. This is an express train.
This is an express train.
Okay.
But when he hit Woodbridge, he would kind of speed up a little bit.
Okay.
This time, the temporary trestle went up, and he was supposed to go at 25 miles an hour. It wasn't 25 miles an hour. It was like 70. And suddenly you felt you heard a screech, and the car kind of wobbled just a little bit, and then the car lurched, and everybody went forward into the seats. They were upholstered seats at that point. And everybody sat quiet. There was no noise. Nobody panicked. But you see this cloud, black cloud, coming up from every seat. And it looked like it was choreographed, because every seat had a cloud which was exactly the same thing. I looked at it as though it were choreographed. After a little while, everybody just got up same time, it seems, and we just stood there, and then I heard a woman say, "We better get off this train."
I'm here with Frank LaPenta, a member of the Woodbridge Historical Association who works hard to preserve the history in Woodbridge. And on February 6, 1951, Frank was an eyewitness to history, and we're going to hear about his involvement with the Woodbridge train wreck. Frank, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me about that day, February 6, 1951.
Well, on February 6, 1951, I was 19 years of age, and I had just come home from work. And I pulled up in front of my mother's house on School Street in Woodbridge. It was about 5:45. And as I turned off the engine to my car, I heard feet steps running up the street, you know. And someone was calling my name. It was my neighbor and friend, Danny Latanzio.
So you automatically recognized these people that were coming up to you?
Yeah. Well, when he started shouting my name, I knew who he was, but all I heard was us running of feet up the street. And he came up to my car window and said, "Frank, a train just went off the track by my uncle's garage down on Fulton Street."
And so how far are you from the train wreck? Are we talking a couple blocks?
About 4 or 5 blocks, not very far, yeah. So we got in the car and we drove down School Street, onto Main Street, and then onto Fulton Street. There was no evidence in town that anything unusual had happened.
Nobody else was running?
No, nobody was running. Nobody was just regular things happening in town. The police officer was directing traffic on Main Street, and it's like nothing had happened. So as we pulled up on Fulton Street, we stopped and we looked across the street. We could see the train wreck. There were cars that had slid down the embankment. This steam engine was up top. It had derailed and was laying on its side. And it looked like to us an empty train.
And so we all went to the rear, and there was no panic. Nobody said anything, really. And we were on a steep embankment, because we were only a quarter of the way over the Legion trestle. But there was a steep embankment And I thought, how am I going to get down? Because I was wearing high heels, and I thought either I'm going to fall or break a leg or something. But I thought if I put all my weight on my heels and my high heels into the sand, and that's what I did, and it was okay.
Were there other people on the in that car that were injured?
I didn't know anybody that was injured in that car.
In that particular car?
That particular car. But as I was going down the embankment, I saw this little old lady. I think I told you she reminded me of my grandmother. She was running as fast as her little legs could carry her in her flat shoes. She had a babushka and the long ethnic dress, and she was carrying this load of white linen. And I thought, dear lady, you shouldn't do that. They're expensive. Why are you doing that? I didn't know the severity of what had happened. It just seemed to me she was running toward the train, but she was the first one to come and offer any help. And my seating companion had noticed two men sitting under the Legion trestle. And he said, I'm going to go help them. But then he came back and he said they were dead. And they were gone.
I got out of the car to get a closer look, and as I walked across the street, there were cars. There were two railroad cars on the trestle that were kinked and hanging. That they were up in the air, and there were like 6 or 8 cars that had rolled down the embankment. They were twisted and they were just torn apart. And as I walked across the street to get a better look, at that time, a fire truck pulled up near me and had a large hydraulic ladder and put it up towards the train. About the same time I looked down, there was a body on the wall right next to me, and I was a young man. He looked about 30 years old. But what was strange is, as I looked at him, I focused on his shoes for some reason. They were real shiny. He actually looked like a mannequin laying there, and I couldn't believe, this is really happening.
So you start to realize that this wasn't an empty passenger train.
That's right.
There were people on board.
What was ironic about the thing, there was no noise. It was actually silent, except for that steam engine going shh, And it took a while for things to sink in. About that time, I turned around, and here comes this woman supporting this man with her arms out. He's covered with blood, reaching out for help and asking for help. About the only thing I could do at that time was direct her to the fire engines and whatnot.
So we worked our way down the embankment and into this row of houses on Fulton Street. Very neat, very well kept. Walked into the house, you could smell dinner and coffee. And there were about 3 or 4 people ahead of me, and I asked if I could use the telephone. They were using a telephone too. And I did. I was able to call my mother and say, don't worry, I'm fine, don't come for me. And everybody offered this young couple money for using the telephone. They would not accept it. But the mother was offering coffee. And I didn't hear anything. It was so quiet. It was quiet in the car. It was quiet outside. It was almost a haunting quietness. All you could hear was the hiss of the steam leaving the locomotive.
Okay.
I didn't hear any ambulances or anything of that, so I'm sure there were, but I didn't hear. Then we just kind of worked our way down, and I don't quite remember. I think we walked over to the locomotive to see what happened, but there was no emotion in watching it. It was like you were looking at something that didn't involve you.
So you could see then these other train cars that had clearly were damaged and wrecked.
Yeah, and we were standing at one point, and there was a man who had fallen through the car window. The car had turned over, and he was out of the window. They were trying to extricate him, and you knew that he was gone. But he just hung in there with his, and that was kind of scary. But you looked at it without emotion. You didn't know. And as I said, I don't know what happened, but all of the survivors were permitted to stay in the area of the embankment so that nobody shoot us off or anything like that. So they did come by and say, there'll be buses taking you home. And as I said, I don't know what happened between the 3 hours, but at one point...
So you were at the site then for about 3 hours?
Oh, yeah. We must have been walking back and forth or just looking, but you were just staring, and I don't really remember, to tell you the truth. I do remember it was night, it was dark, and there were all floodlights and everything, but still there was a stillness. And then a pickup truck drove right in front of us, and there were bodies in there. And, hands stretched in different directions and legs. And one man, and I didn't look at his head, I don't even know he had one. But at that point I thought, my stomach really turned, and I felt weak, and I just said, I've got to go home.
our town had had a fledgling emergency squad, you know, and they had like 2 ambulances, and when they showed up, holy hell broke loose. You know, all these people start coming down by the hundreds, you know.
So at this point, there's passengers now that are exiting or trying to get out of these.
Get out of the train. Of course, some of the cars are split open, and whatever way they got out, I don't know.
So you have there's both train cars that have come off this, it's a high embankment, so they've come off this high embankment. There's some that are in the street, and then you still have some that are up on the...
Well, most of them were on the embankment. What had happened there, they're rerouting roads around Woodbridge and around the state because they were building new highways. And what they did in Woodbridge is they were building the turnpike, so they had to reroute part of the train tracks and then put them back. So what they did is they created this thing called a shoe fly off the main line and then back on the main line while they worked on the bridge over Legion Street. And because of this, it was all new dirt and new embankment. And even after we got people to help, people were coming with wooden ladders and whatnot, trying to climb up on the train. It had rained the night before, and things were muddy and slippery. So even to try to get up in the trains was hazardous. And some of the neighbors and people just carried their ladders up trying to get into the train.
Right, and I understand the weather for that day too. I mean, it was sort of rainy or drizzly and cold.
It had rained the night before, and as people tried to climb that embankment, their feet would get stuck in the mud because it was a new embankment. They had just built it temporarily until they moved the train over, and then they moved it back when they completed it, you know.
So after about 10 minutes while you're there, I mean, the ambulances start to arrive, the fire department starts to get there. I mean, people, I guess, start to realize what's happening. I mean, at that point, do you realize that, I mean, this is clearly a very tragic event that's taking place?
Not quite, because it took a while to sink in, and even after I was there, I didn't realize the extent of it. Because you start getting statistics and how many people aboard the train and how many people actually killed. But there were 85 people killed and over 500 were hurt. The train was loaded. There was just standing room only on that train.
And as we approached the area where we were told to go, I saw a man who, in military garb, and he took us to the bus. And on the bus I met a man who was in the first car, and I knew him, he was fine. I heard that somebody in the bar car had died, and I assume now it must have been from a heart attack. I don't know. But the bus was very quiet. The people just talked very haltingly and very quietly. And they said, we would take you to your door. And I think I probably was the first or second person on the route. And I thought, no, there's so many people who are on the bus from Spring Lake, and they were not able to get in touch with their families. And that was another hour ride, half-hour ride. And I thought, the family must be really concerned. So I thought, no, just drop me off at South Amboy and I'll pick up a bus. So he did, but he really wanted to take me home to Sayreville. And I thought, no, this is fine. When I got off, I wondered if I did the right thing. And then I met a man that was really very nice. He, for want of another title, he was a starter with these electrical trains going from South Amboy to New York, and he would hold the train for me if my bus were 1 or 2 minutes late every day. So he kind of got to be very friendly. He came out, and he was so concerned. He tried to get me a cab. He wanted to have somebody take me home, and I said, no, the bus will come sooner or later. And as I stood there thinking, again, did I do the right thing? A friend passed by in his car with some of his friends. They had tried to go to Woodbridge, but all the traffic was, stymied. They couldn't get through. And he took me home. His name was Alfred Henney. He took me home.
So when you came home, how did your family react?
Well, of course, my mother told me that she was able to get my father just before somebody came in. He was working a second shift in DuPont. And that she was able to get in touch with him just before a coworker came in to say, there's been a big accident on the Broker. My mother had called the Dr. Smith in South River and asked what, should she take me down to his office? And he said, no, just give her brandy. I developed a taste for brandy then.
So were you injured in the accident?
It's just that I was in shock and talking a lot. I just talk, couldn't stop talking. And then, of course, my aunts and uncles came down. The next day I went in and I didn't see this man who helped me was Mr. Barber, the man at the train station, and he wasn't there, and I thought he probably had a long night and took the day off.
So when you say you went in, you actually went to work the next day after this happened?
Yeah, oh yeah. I thought that's the best of,
Yeah.
you know.
Now, did the train, so you would have been on the train as it went right by this scene then?
Yeah, and I looked the other way. I was sitting on the right-hand side, so I looked at the road in Woodbridge. I didn't look at the
Wow. Huh.
you know, I didn't want to look at that.
So did it start to sink in the next day that this really was a major accident?
Yeah, when I saw the headlines and heard the news on WCTC, of course, fortunately I called my mother before WCTC was announcing the accident, so that was good. I was pleased about that. But this man, Mr. Barber, I missed him and I wondered where he was, and I learned that his wife was in the accident. She had taken an unexpected trip to Newark. He didn't know that she was going to check on a nursing school for one of his daughters. And she was in the Perth Amboy Hospital. She told she might lose her leg or her foot, but her other injuries were not life-threatening. But as it happened, she died the next morning. And, you know, meeting him after about 2 weeks after that was very difficult. That was a difficult thing because he was just so compassionate. And there was nothing I could say or you know, do to help him.
Were there injured people there? Did you help sort of bring them or direct them to go anywhere?
Well, mostly what happened is that once it went out over the radio, people come in by the thousands.
Yeah.
They come in by the thousands. Mainly what we did, crowd control, we put up tapes and barriers and we direct people over to the ambulance and whatnot. There wasn't a hell of a lot we could do. I was 19 at the time.
Right.
What happened in the middle of the thing, some woman come up to me crying, begging me to take her home. I did have my automobile there. So I took her out of town. At this time, it wasn't as crowded. But by the time I got back to Woodbridge, it was impossible to get into town.
Really? Huh.
It was. There was calls going out for ambulance for all the communities, and they did show up. But so did everybody else. All the spectators come. My brother Bob, who had to purchase an old Army ambulance, he got the word, and he ran down there with his Army ambulance. He took several loads back and forth to the hospital, but with less injuries. You know, just.
So where were people going? Perth Amboy?
They went to Perth Amboy and every hospital around.
So you have an understanding that people are injured. I mean, did you have an understanding of how many people may have been killed?
No, that's what I was saying a while ago. We didn't realize people were up there dying. And
Well, we're on the corner of Fulton Street and Legion Street in Woodbridge, where on February 6, 1951, the broker crashed. The steam engine and several of the passenger cars rolled off this embankment onto Fulton Street and lay in a twisted wreckage of metal. 85 people were killed and over 350 people were injured. Where I'm sitting was the location where one of the passenger cars crashed into the cement embankment. And one of those clues still survives today. If we look carefully at the top of the concrete, we can see where the concrete has been repatched to repair the damage from that train wreck. Today, with the Woodbridge Historical Association, I mean, you've been involved with helping to commemorate this event. I mean, so not only did you actually witness it and sort of live through part of this, but later in life you realized that this was something that's worth sort of getting the history of and commemorating. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, what happened a while back, we realized, seniors we're losing them, and we thought, well, we should start making some records of people that lived around town, a little bit about town. And then we found out there was a tape available from the Corps of Engineers.
And so this was a tape that was shot at the time of the...
At the time of the train
They actually filmed
and
it.
things that went on, there. And we got a copy of it, and then we decided, well, it'd be a good idea to hold a forum and invite people back to talk about their experiences. And we did that. And And while we're looking around, there weren't many people to talk about it, and then all of a sudden I realized I was one of them that should be testifying. So I did, and I sort of chaired this thing. And we had about 150 people there, and we had like 4 or 5 people come out to testify, but a lot of people didn't want to talk about it, you know, the ones that were really into it. And it was difficult trying to find people that were aboard the train, although in the audience later on people told me they were, you know, and they had relatives. This one fellow was asking me if I might have seen her father, you know, and I didn't, you know. But on the tape, you'll see some of them, you know, that were uncovered. This one guy talked to me about one of the rescue guys we had at the forum. He says, I was up by the train, they had a wooden ladder, tried to climb up into the train to help. He said, I heard this voice saying, hey, buddy, you know. He said, look down, the guy was under the train, all his head was sticking out. He said, buddy, you got a cigarette, you know. He said, I gave him a cigarette. But there are a couple of pictures that you'll see with actually people under the train, you know. And another guy told me he went aboard the train. He said, we're trying to get the people out, and there's this one body we kept stepping over. He said, so we got a torch and we cut him out, you know, so we make it easier getting out. He said, and the guy got up and walked away. Can you imagine? What a surprise. He went down the end of the car and fell over. There were a few stories like that.
Yeah. So you understand, I guess, at some point, that as a historian here in Woodbridge, to understand that you have to start gathering this information and preserving it, and understanding too, as you just mentioned, that you have a story too. You were involved with it. At what point do you look to sort of permanently commemorate it with a memorial
we did
near
that
the
already.
site?
Yes, we did that, and I have a copy of the dedication here. What year was that? It was in 2002. We did make a memorial. It took us 50 years to do it. Working with Charles Kenny, one of our council people, and the railroad, they supplied the plaque, and we made the dedication of it. And I have pictures of the dedication and a few of the people that are on board the train, and we dedicated it, you know.
And so how long did you continue to take the train after this happened?
My entire career, covering almost 40 years.
Well, we appreciate you sharing your story with us today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to thank you for sitting down and talking with us about this story, and thank you very much for coming on and talking with us about this event. We appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed today's episode of On the History Trail, as we talked to people who were an eyewitness to history. And I also hope that we brought some honor to the 85 people who were killed at this site on February 6, 1951. So come along again and follow me as we travel on the History Trail.